When the golden sun set over California's quiet neighborhoods, something far more sinister emerged from the shadows. For more than 40 years, the Golden State Killer tormented families, striking fear into the hearts of those who thought they were safe. Who was he? And how did he vanish without a trace for decades? Asterisk. This is the story of terror, survival, and a justice that took over 4 decades to come. California's days of fear. Background music becomes tense as the scene shifts to 1970s California. Images of the state's sunny suburbs, peaceful neighborhoods, and family life appear. Narrator calm but increasingly intense. In the 1970s, California was a place where dreams came true. From the sun-kissed beaches to the bustling streets of Los Angeles, it was the land of freedom. But beneath the warmth and comfort, something dark was lurking. A figure who would go on to change everything. Cut to a new breed of terror. Shift to images of police reports and crime scenes from the late 1970s. Tension builds with dark, ominous tones. Serious with suspenseful pauses. By 1977, the attacks escalated. No longer just break-ins or assaults, the Golden State Killer started to focus on couples in their own homes. He crept in the darkness, silent as a shadow. He would bind his victims, separate them, and make them live through the unimaginable. Flashbacks of scared couples and victims being bound. Narrator, voice heavy with emotion. The victims were terrorized, their fears magnified by a chilling warning, plates placed on the man's back, with the threat if they moved, everyone would die. It was a psychological game as much as a physical one. The Golden State Killer wasn't just a criminal, he was a monster of manipulation. Evolution of evil. The music shifts to something darker, illustrating a growing sense of danger. Images of police sketches and empty, ominous streets are shown. Grave, ominous tone. By 1979, the killer's methods had evolved. His attacks had become more vicious, more deadly. No longer just assaults, now murder. And the crime scenes were left brutal. Couples found dead, bound, and bludgeoned. The killer was not just taking lives, he was destroying everything. Images of detectives working late at night, staring at crime scene photos, flow with a note of despair. And as the years passed, police were left with nothing but questions. Who was he? How had he managed to evade capture? Why was he so careful, so meticulous? Each case seemed more perfect than the last, leaving investigators chasing ghosts in the night. A puzzle with no picture. Cut to images of cold case files stacking up and families grieving, sympathetic but with rising frustration. For years, the victims' families had no answers. No justice. The police had very little to go on. No fingerprints, no obvious clues. Only vague descriptions of a man who was smart, athletic, and perhaps most terrifying of all, invisible. Show images of various police departments working separately, struggling to connect the dots, emphasizing the hopelessness. By the late 1980s, the killer had vanished. The attacks stopped. But the nightmare didn't end. It lived on in the victims' families, who were left to pick up the shattered pieces of their lives. They couldn't forget, and neither could the police. The breakthrough, DNA. Cue dramatic music, cutting to scientists in labs, DNA samples under a microscope, and investigators looking through files, excited, building up the tension. The years passed, but technology advanced. By the early 2000s, DNA analysis became more precise. Investigators turned to the one thing they had never considered before: genetic forensics. Could the answer lay in the killer's DNA, hidden in plain sight? Show footage of DNA samples being tested, computers whirring, and detectives working tirelessly, triumphant. In 2001, they discovered DNA evidence at multiple crime scenes, confirming their worst fears. The same man had committed these heinous acts. But they still couldn't find him. Dramatic pause, hopeful. And then, in 2018, a revolutionary breakthrough. Detectives took a chance. They used a genealogy website to search for distant relatives of the killer. Slowly but surely, the pieces started to fall. The arrest of Joseph James DeAngelo. Cue tense music as images of Joseph James DeAngelo in the police station are shown, whispering, chilling. In April 2018, after 40 years of terror, the Golden State Killer was finally unmasked. His name? Joseph James DeAngelo, a former police officer, a man who had sworn to protect, but instead had terrorized. Show DeAngelo's mugshot and news footage of his arrest, gravely serious. The man who had escaped justice for 4 decades was now facing it. He was arrested in the small town of Citrus Heights, California, where he had lived a quiet life. A life that had been built on a dark secret. Justice and final closure. Show courtrooms, victims' families in attendance, and the gavel falling. Relieved, yet somber. In August 2020, Joseph DeAngelo pled guilty to 13 murders, 13 rapes, and several other charges. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. For many, it was a victory. Justice had finally arrived. Cut to emotional reactions from survivors and families as they processed the verdict, with a final sense of resolution. Though justice had been delayed, it was still delivered. And for the families of the victims, the nightmares had ended. But for some, the scars will never heal. The Golden State Killer had been unmasked, but the terror he left behind will echo in the hearts of many for generations. Outro. Slow, somber music fades in. Final line with a reflective tone. Some monsters hide in the darkness for decades, but the light of truth, no matter how long it takes, will always fly.